Well, let's now turn our attention to some analysis of 2024, the year of the polls. It's really important for the India story because what's happening in the rest of the world is going to affect us here. And remember, half of the world's population is going to be holding national elections in 2024. 41 national or presidential elections are scheduled. More than 3.2 billion people are going to be casting their vote, and that's even assuming you don't have surprises like the UK suddenly deciding to have an election. Dozens of countries, of course, are also going to be holding municipal and regional elections out there. The EU, that's going to be voting as well to elect the European Parliament. So essentially, you're going to have, 7 or 8 of the world's 10 most populous countries holding national elections. India, Brazil, Bangladesh, US, Russia, Mexico. 2.73 billion people are going to be voting. Now, all of this is happening despite all the ruckus that we've seen in 2023, wars in the Middle East, wars in Russia and Ukraine. By the way, both Russia and Ukraine, but potentially could be going to the polls, although we're not quite sure what Zelensky is doing out there right now. Now, why is this so important? For one, many election watchers have been saying that it's a crucial year for democracy itself because there are charges of democratic backsliding in country after country. I mean, starting with Ukraine, what Zelensky is doing out there, Bangladesh, there have been questions. Remember, 8 of the countries that are going to be voting right now are considered full democracies according to some of the lists that are out there. 21 countries are listed as flawed democracies. 9 countries are classified as hybrid regimes. 15 countries are considered to have authoritarian rules. I mean, remember, elections are happening in Russia, for example, and not that many people are believing it's actually going to be free and fair with Navalny in prison and so on and so forth. So in essence, there's going to be a key question around how many of these elections are free and fair and who comes to power, and will democracy itself get a boost in 2024 or will it see setbacks? That's going to be one set of questions. Number 2, whoever comes to power in these elections, what does that mean for the world? What does that mean for global peace? What does that mean for the global economy? People being elected, as for example might happen in Taiwan, which could escalate tensions. How does that play itself out on the global stage? But also, from an Indian point of view, most of these elections are going to be watched very closely because it does matter who comes to power in different countries has a direct impact on India, has a direct impact on the India story. Of course, you'll hear a lot about the United States, who's going to win in the United States and how does that have an impact on India. But it's not just the United States. Take a look at the region, for example. There are going to be key electoral contests taking place in Bangladesh, in Pakistan. The elections in Bangladesh are just, happening right now, a day or two away. Awami League leader and PM Sheikh Hasina is eyeing a 4th term. Now, the main opposition party, BNP, has decided to boycott the polls, which means that Sheikh Hasina's victory is more or less certain. What implication is that going to have? Then you have Pakistan. Elections have been postponed twice since August 2023. There's a caretaker government at the helm since Parliament was dissolved. Polls have been delayed twice and are now scheduled for February the 8th. Remember, in Pakistan, no elected leader has really completed a full 5-year term. And in Pakistan, elections taking place among serious economic crises, high political tensions, the question of what happens with the army. We're not quite sure what's going to happen out there, and we're not quite sure as to what is going to happen after the elections when it comes to relations with India. Yes, we know Nawaz Sharif is saying he wants peace with India, but we'll have to see if he actually wins, and if he does win, will he be allowed to have peace in India? And there are other, of course, countries going to the polls in South Asia. Of course, none more important, I guess, than India, which is going to be the biggest test of democracy in this entire year. Certainly from the point of view of the number of people who are eligible to vote, nearly a billion people. Prime Minister Modi is right now, all the opinion polls are saying he's likely to secure a 3rd term. But we are going to be talking to experts right now on what could possibly happen there. Let's go further afield. Let's give you some of the other elections that could have a major impact when it comes to us, elections that you should watch. Next up on the calendar, Taiwan. Polls in that democratically ruled island nations are set for January the 13th, barely a week away. Now, Taiwan's facing growing threats from China. The pro-American Lai Ching-te is leading in the polls. China claims that Taiwan is part of its territory, and if somebody who's pro-independence comes to power, how will China react? China is threatening, in fact, to fulfill what it says is reunification, code word for we're going to go in there and annex Taiwan. But if China does that lead to a world war? The answers to that question may just be a week or so away. So do watch that very closely. But there are other elections coming up. Iran. Will polls be fair there? Will polls be free there? 2024 elections in Iran will be the first since those 2022 nationwide protests. The ruling government was formed in 2020, dominated by conservatives. 25% opposition candidates have already been disqualified. Many Iranians are expected to boycott those elections. But that's going to be another crucial election. Those elections, by the way, scheduled for the 1st of March 2024. Why? Because you know what's happening in the Middle East. You know what's happening potentially in the Red Sea. You're seeing what's happening with oil prices. What will happen in Iran? Could that have a bearing on peace in the Middle East? Again, that is a factor which is going to affect India and affect the India story. Other elections, perhaps easier to predict what the outcome are going to be. I was talking about Russia a short while back. Now, amidst all this war, how will Putin use the elections? Those elections are just after Iran. Elections are scheduled from March the 15th to the 17th. Vladimir Putin is going to be running for president, and I can predict he is going to win. Victory in those elections will keep Putin in power till 2030. Putin can, of course, run for a further 2 6-year terms after 2024, so could continue all the way till 2036. Now, voting is also going to be taking place in the Russian elections in those parts of Ukraine that are now controlled by Russian forces. Around 110 million people, of course, are eligible to vote in Russia, but there are going to be questions around that entire election. Other elections to possibly watch in 2024, you see Rishi Sunak's face out there. Well, elections in the UK are not scheduled for 2024, they're scheduled for 2025, but who knows? You may well have a snap election this year, which would then certainly make 2024 the most important year for elections ever in history. But setting the UK aside, whatever happens, remember the other big election that we should be watching. There are going to be elections for the European Parliament between the 6th to the 9th of June. More than 27 member countries in the European Union are going to be voting. 400 million voters are going to be electing 720 members. That's, of course, the world's biggest transnational election. And it's, of course, significant given all the tension that we are seeing and the Russia-Ukraine war. So a large number of elections to be monitored all through 2024, and we are going to be doing that here on the India Story, but perhaps none more important than the world's largest democratic voting exercise, which will, of course, play itself out right here in India. Now, we're not sure the exact dates. Could be April, could be May, we're not quite sure. Will there be a snap poll a little earlier than that? Well, of course, we're going to wait and see what the actual date is. But it is going to be quite a spectacle. Remember, nearly 1 billion people are going to be eligible to vote. All right, so let's start off, of course, with that Indian election and all the other elections. With two very special experts joining us, Brahma Chalani and Yashwant Deshmukh, the director of Sea Voter, the man who can tell you down to a seat what is likely to happen in the Indian election and perhaps some other elections as well. Thank you both so much for joining us. We're going to discuss the other elections, what's happening in other parts of the world as well. But Yashwant, I'm going to start off with you. And you know the question I'm going to ask you. The Indian elections, at the end of the day, the greatest show on earth. Do you think it is a done deal right now? Is it a given fact that Prime Minister Modi is coming back for the third term? Or could there still be a twist in the tail, which is what the opposition is hoping for?
Hi, Vikram. Well, there is nothing called a done deal as such in politics, but at the same time, there are macro symptoms which are very much available in our data. And they are pretty much showing that the gap between the two persons or the two parties or the two alliances is so big that if the elections are held today, then it certainly, from the data point of view, it certainly looks like a done deal. I don't see BJP's number going below 300 if the elections are held today. And I don't see unless there is a black swan event, a rarest of the rare thing that might happen and that might swing the electoral mood in just opposite direction, unless something of that sort happens, I don't think much would change. The only difference where, as a cephalologist, my area of interest is not if they will cross 300 or not. Its area of interest is how further can the BJP go from here along with their allies in terms of votes particularly, and then followed up by the seats.
Hang on a bit. So you're saying 300 plus for the BJP alone, which means that the NDA, of course, is a very, very, very comfortable, margin of that. Which, to your mind, would be the interesting states that we should look for in the next 3 to 4 months, which might have a bearing on that? I mean, the opposition, I guess, would be eyeing what? Karnataka, West Bengal, Bihar, maybe Maharashtra to bring the BJP's number down. BJP may be hoping that the number will go up in Uttar Pradesh. Would that be a fair summary?
That's a fair summary. In fact, I would only keep an eye on 3, Vikram. And that is West Bengal, Bihar, and Maharashtra. Karnataka, yes, there is an interesting state because Congress had won that. But our data very clearly shows that even when the BJP lost the assembly election, the votes, Lok Sabha voting intent quotient at that point of time in our numbers were way higher for the BJP than the Congress. And understanding very clearly that BJP had, approached JDS, taken them into the NDA fold, and they are coming with almost like 10% plus Vokalinga solid vote bank in the southern Karnataka. So I don't see much change as such in Karnataka.
What do you think the dynamics in those are and Uttar Pradesh? I mean, do you think BJP could come down significantly in those 3 states, or would it be only 5-10 seats, which then pretty much wouldn't make much of a difference one way or the other?
Well, BJP's seat share in UP will only go up from here because last time in the Mahagathbandhan, they lost few seats. That's fine. But now, unless Mayawati also unites Congress and SP and RLD together, that's a different scenario. Otherwise, Mayawati contesting separately will only end up in BJP increasing at least 10 seats in Uttar Pradesh. But as far as Bihar and West Bengal and Maharashtra are concerned, all 3 states are having a different kind of dynamics. In West Bengal, it is certainly Mamata Banerjee versus the BJP. Mamata Banerjee is still very popular. She holds the ground over there. It depends on how many seats, if at all, she goes into an alliance with the Congress and the left. She leaves it for them, and will that be triggering another kind of a polarization in anti-Mamata votes, which also go to the Congress and the left? That is number 1. Number 2, Bihar is very, very interesting because Nitish Kumar, who is arguably the face of the opposition, wanted to be the face of the opposition. But in our data, that is one person whose popularity ratings have crashed like anything in the last couple of years. So I don't really see JDU scoring big time, depending on how many seats they contest. Lalu Prasad ji said that they will be contesting 17 each and, leaving the rest for the alliance partners. But honestly speaking, looking as on today, I would be highly surprised if JD United, Janata Dal United actually opens up the account in parliament in that way. These things are so bad for him. Yes, Tejasvi Yadav remains very, very popular. Lalu Yadav remained very popular. So the way the Bihar is behaving, it is pro-Tejasvi, anti-Nitish. BJP might reap benefit in some places, might get thrashed in some other. So that's a contest to watch out for in Bihar. And as far as Maharashtra is concerned, God knows. Brahma ko bhi nahi pata ki abhi kya ho raha hai. Reason being, how can a voter decide who is going to vote for when we don't know which faction is where, which kind of leader is where, which kind of seats are going to be allocated, and who is going to contest against whom we do not know.
Other than India, which are the elections that you are going to be watching particularly closely? Obviously, everyone's going to be talking about the United States, but there are others. I was just talking about Bangladesh coming up right now. Then there's Taiwan coming up right now as well. And then others will keep on following. Which are you going to be tracking really closely?
I think the US is going to be the very interesting one because, we do, of course, run the trackers in US elections as well. And so far, the numbers which are showing up are pretty much, within the Republican primary, the way Mr. Trump is placed right now, he is the most popular one against Biden. Actually, he is scoring over Biden one-on-one. But the way he is being placed, he is being taken out of the ballot, his legal positioning on the on how to be put on the ballot or not, that is going to be interesting to watch out for. Bangladesh is very, very critical, very, very critical. Somehow I find it very, very ironical and funny that US manages to end up in Bangladesh on the other side of the Indian interest. They have been saying very, very upfrontly that Sheikh Hasina is undemocratic. The way the Western Bloc is moving, big number of them, including US wants Sheikh Hasina to go, which is not happening, by the way.
One last quick take from you on the UK, because the United Kingdom is not scheduled to go for the polls, but is it, you've been monitoring the situation there, is it possible there'll be a snap election, and if so, what happens to Rishi Sunak?
It's possible, because my sources are telling me that things are not very normal and not very comfortable for Rishi Sunak as well. And when he goes into the poll, I mean, all the numbers over there are giving Labour quite significant lead, but anybody who is watching UK election, they know that the Labour lead actually starts converting into seats big time after a significant lead, because their pockets, they managed to win with huge margins, and Tories managed to win smaller margins. However, having said that, with such a long stint by the Tories in the government, it's 15 years of anti-incumbency that has been built on. So I will not be surprised that Rishi Sunak doesn't really manage to win as and when the elections happen.
This entire question of 2024 being the year when democracy itself is on trial, that will it be a year of democratic backsliding? Will it be a year where if XYZ people win, are they going to erode institutions and do away with it? And those questions presumably are going to be asked in many of these elections, not just Russia, but it could be asked in Ukraine, it could be asked in, it's being asked in Bangladesh right now, many countries.
Well, there are way too many elections happening around the globe, but oddly enough, not all of them are in the real democratic world or real democratic order, one may say so. You have recently witnessed the elections for example, in Egypt. There are going to be Russian elections as well. Do we have any doubt who is going to win there? So there are plenty of the elections which are in process and in the way, but somehow I am always curious the way the West reads some of the elections which are fair and square, but do not fit into the Western interest, which include, by the way, elections in India, Mr. Modi's victory, and also, for example, elections in Turkey, where we witness Erdogan winning again, maybe in a second round, but let's not forget, Vikram, that the guy won fair and square, winning 52% approximately, which has been his vote for almost like 30 years now. He has been winning with the same margin. So just because the elections went into a runoff, entire West, looked at it with a great hope as if something else is going to happen, which was not the fact. So these India and Turkey in their own way are not really, though these leaders are not really on the good list of the West as such, but both these leaders have been popular. They have won their elections fair and square. However, there are so many countries where the elections are not fair and square. Still, they are being treated as a holy democracy mandate, by many of the Western commentators and experts alike. So, not just how many elections and where they are happening, it's also interesting to see that by the end of this year, how the West looks into you must have seen the take of Foreign Policy magazine on literally announcing that if Modi wins another mandate in India, it will be end of democracy, literally saying that. I think this is going to be interesting from that perspective. This holier than thou attitude of the West and a section of the West, that how the democracy is not a democracy if the mandate is not really coming the way they wish it should come. That needs to change.
All right, Yashwant, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks a lot. Such a pleasure talking to you. Well, let's now get in Brahma Chalani, one of the country's top strategic thinkers. Brahma, when it comes to the point of view of which of the elections is going to have the biggest impact for India, when the Indian elections, of course, United States we all know about. But which are the other elections you think is going to be particularly critical for us to monitor closely?
I think first let's remember that this year is unusual because the largest number of countries are going to the polls in a single year. And the elections this year are spread across all the continents. Countries that are home to more than half the global population will hold elections this year. They include 8 of the 10 most populous countries of the world. Even in the global south, the key democracies from South Africa and Mexico to India and Indonesia will go to the polls this year. And the outcome of these elections could have a profound impact on our world. Let's start with India's neighborhood. Bangladesh will soon have its general elections. The opposition BNP is boycotting these elections. Sheikh Hasina has given Bangladesh political stability and rapid economic growth.
So in that case, Brahma, I'm going to just go through each of these one by one. So on the question of Bangladesh that you just mentioned, Sheikh Hasina almost certainly coming back, right? Now, there are people who say that there are elements in her government who are close to China. But for India, obviously, we've had very close relations with Sheikh Hasina. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
You're absolutely right, Vikram. Sheikh Hasina is very important for Bangladesh's continued economic and political upward trajectory. Political stability is the base for economic growth. And Sheikh Hasina leads a secular pro-economic growth party, the Awami League, and her return to office will be good for Bangladesh, but also good for the region.
You would not be too concerned, Brahma, about the so-called Chinese influence in Bangladesh with Sheikh Hasina's regime? I mean, I guess most countries in the neighborhood also balance India and China. I mean, she is still seen as being pro-India, and certainly a lot better than the BNP would have been.
You're right. There is Chinese influence right across South and Southeast Asia. There isn't a single country that is immune from growing Chinese influence. But the fact is that in India's immediate neighborhood, US policies are pushing certain countries into China's lap. Myanmar is a very good example of how an independent country that has traditionally been reluctant to become too close to China is now being pushed toward China. Bangladesh is a country that the US under Biden has been targeting. It has threatened to impose sanctions on Bangladeshi officials if the elections are not free and fair, while the Biden administration turns a blind eye to the indirect military rule in Pakistan. Pakistan is also having its elections very soon in February, but those elections are going to be a farce, as Imran Khan has been saying. Yet, you'll never hear a single American official comment on what's happening in Pakistan.
Right, I'm glad you mentioned Pakistan. What's your take on, I mean, does India have any skin in the game out there? Does it matter to us who actually forms the government in Pakistan? Or is it more or less irrelevant? The army is going to call the shots?
Whatever the outcome of Pakistan's February 8th election, one reality will not change. The country's domineering military will remain the ultimate hand wielding political power behind a civilian-led government. Pakistan essentially is a one-party state. The only party that has ruled the country directly or indirectly since the first coup in 1958 is the military.
Right. Let me move to some of the other elections, Brahma. Brahma, if I could get your views on the United States election. That's, of course, a big one a little later in the year. Of course, there's been a certain perception, is Trump going to be better for India? Is Biden better for India? And there could be some other candidate as well. How high are the stakes, you think, when it comes to who actually is going to win the election in the United States? Or does it not matter too much for India? There'll be some bipartisan consensus on many issues.
No election this year will have a greater impact on the world than the one in the US on November 5th, when voters elect the country's next president, as well as the entire House of Representatives and a third of the Senate. Biden's poll numbers are already dismal, even as questions swirl over his mental acuity and physical health. A second term for Biden seems increasingly unlikely by present projections. If the weak poll numbers prompt the 80-year-old Biden to drop out of the race, it would not only spark a messy intra-Democratic Party battle over the replacement nominee, but it will throw the entire election into unfamiliar territory. We also have the case of Zelensky, whose term is going to end in March. But the guy says he will not hold the election because the country is at war. Now, Zelensky, as you know, is the poster boy of the West for democracy. But he has banned opposition parties, he has jailed political opponents, shut down independent media outlets, and clamped down on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And he governs by martial law. And yet, you see, now there's a rift in Ukraine that is becoming more and more visible between Zelensky and the military. By undermining his political legitimacy through refusal to hold elections, Zelensky is inviting the risk of being ousted by the military. For Zelensky, 2023 was a very tough year. But make no mistake, this year is likely to be even tougher for Zelensky.
Right. Let's turn our attention finally to Taiwan, because Taiwan, there's going to be elections out there. Most of the candidates seem to be not very favorably inclined to China. You've been a close China watcher. Again, what happens out there and what's the impact that it's going to have on India?
Taiwan's vote on January 13 will have an important bearing on cross-state relations. China-Taiwan relations, as you know, are already very tense because Beijing has regularized coercive pressure on Taipei. Taiwan has almost as many people as Australia. Australia is almost a continent-sized country. Despite being a small island, Taiwan is a technological powerhouse that plays a central role in the international semiconductor business. A Chinese annexation of Taiwan will not only make China a more formidable economic power, but also threaten global peace and increase pressure on India. And 2024, this year, could serve as an opportunity for Xi Jinping, who's itching to annex Taiwan. He has called the incorporation of Taiwan as a historic mission and he said just a few days ago that this mission will be accomplished. China could ratchet up pressure on Taiwan if the ruling Democratic Progressive Party candidate, Lai, wins. Lai is committed to defending Taiwan's sovereignty. If Taiwan goes, you can imagine what will happen. The next region that China will seek to absorb in the name of quote-unquote reunification will be India's sprawling state of Arunachal Pradesh. So Taiwan's continued autonomous status is essential for India's long-term security.
All right. Thank you so much, Brahma. Before I allow you to go, any other election other than the one that we have been talking about that you think is really important from an Indian point of view?
Well, the world's largest Muslim nation, the most populous Muslim nation, Indonesia, is going to the polls on February 14. And that election is going to tighten the hold of dynasties on politics. What we are seeing is something very unusual. The outgoing president is supporting not his own party's presidential candidate, but another guy, the defense minister, because the defense minister's running mate is the outgoing president's son. And the whole constitution, the constitution forbids anybody to run for presidentship or to be vice president candidate if the person is below 40. And yet, Indonesia's constitution court, headed by the outgoing president's brother-in-law, ruled controversially that the president's son was eligible to run as a running mate of the defense minister. So, the Indonesia election is a crazy one. Then we have Mexico, where both major sides have fielded women candidates. So Mexico will get its first woman president in June when the election is held.
All right. Thanks, Brahma. Thanks a lot. We'll keep coming back to you during the year as each of these elections happens and see what the impact is going to be on India and on the India story.
Thank you, Vikram. Bye.
Thanks, Brahma. Bye.